Good morning.
Good morning.
The gospel, the very words mean good news. So here's your good news, short sermon. Your ham should be okay by the time you get home. Keep your reservations. You've got time to beat the Baptists through the drive-thrus. Good news. In your program today, and for those of you who are worshiping from home, it was included in your email with the newsletters. There's a sermon note sheet if you'd like to follow along. The good news here, too, is it will not be graded. You don't have to sign your name to it. No pressure. God is watching. In just 3 years, 3 days, and 3 hours, Jesus changed the world. All over the world today, you could find people of any religion you wish, and some who are not religious, and they'll tell you something about the birth of Christ. And they'll tell you what they know about his resurrection. They'll include it in Easter. And it's not just the death, burial, and resurrection that we're here for. Well, that's important. Without it, there is no Christianity. If any of that falls through, why are we here? But it held true, and we're here to talk about the things that happened in between his birth and that period of time. And you think about it, Jesus on earth is showing us what God is truly like. He came to complete the story so that we could see how God works, and he used many things in his ministry to do this. In 3 years of his ministry, he has to cover all the things that are important for people to know. When our Gospels here only record a portion of what he did, but it includes the important portions. So we stop and we look at these. And he used miracles throughout his ministry because God gave him the power to do so. He is God on earth. And if you're following in your sermon notes, these miracles serve 3 purposes. The first of these shows compassion. Our God's a loving God. He doesn't give us what we deserve. He gives us what we need. He doesn't give us what we deserve because he gives us grace. It's abundant, and there's a lot of it, and he knows we need a lot of it. The second thing that these miracles, they show what God is like. This is not the God of the Old Testament when Jesus is here. He hasn't changed, but the way he talks to the people has. He doesn't follow or have the people follow him coming out of Egypt in a cloud. It's not that he's just a pillar of light at night. It's not that you can find God just in the thunder and the earthquakes and the lightning and the floods. But you can see God. We're created in his image. That doesn't mean we look like him or that he looks like us. What that really means is that we are alike in thought. And so what Jesus is going to do is how do we put those thoughts to work? And finally, the third thing of what you can follow about the miracles is that they are a glimpse of the world to come, not this imperfect world, not this imperfect time that we're living in, but it's a glimpse of what things are like because there's more than just this. Do you know you could group miracles into just 2 categories? You can do that. There are cures and there's control. And cures, let's talk about those, and we'll get into the kinds of cures there were. It's about restoring us to what God had in mind for us. We're not too hot, we're not too cold, we're just right. We're not ill, we're not disabled. We're in what's called a perfect state. The big word is called homeostasis, that is the steady state. That's what God wanted, but now we are in this imperfect world, and that's not what we get. So it's important to have cures. And these cures, these miracles of curing can be dropped into 3 categories, and they all start with a D. First are the diseases, and there's plenty of examples. Restoring sight to the blind, taking those who have disabilities and turning them into people who are not disabled. Take up thy mat and walk. Even things like leprosy. A fundamental understanding back then was that it was bad to be around a leper. That's not true. That was a social stigma. It's a very low percentage you'll ever be able to catch leprosy from somebody who has it. But it was disfiguring, and people stayed away from it, and it created social outcasts. He cured that. So he cured all these diseases. Then the next thing he worked on was the demons. He cast them out. They all knew his name. They feared him. All you had to do was mention the name of Jesus. If you were Jesus, and they took flight. They left. And maybe what's happened to us in these days and times is there's different kinds of demons. Things that we spend too much time doing that we shouldn't, things that we do that we know are wrong, things that God doesn't approve, and taken to excess, those can be the kind of demons that we need to drive out again. And then he cured death. That's sort of the Easter story. He raised not just Lazarus from the dead. There's at least 10 examples in the Bible. Some of those are in the Old Testament. There's at least 5 in the New Testament where he raised people from the dead. And he saved the best victory over that for the end. So many of his next group of miracles were the control miracles. We've been cured. We see what God can do. We can accept his cures. And John makes the point of these control miracles, and this is a common theme throughout. In the 4th chapter of John, but whoever drinks of the water that I give them shall never thirst. You can look where you want to in the Bible and you won't find a more important message than that. It can be simple or it can be complex. We apply the common sense that God gives us. We look at the examples and we understand what he means by the healing waters, the living waters. Zechariah, it's not new, but Zechariah back in the Old Testament talked about this. He said, in that day, living waters will flow out of Jerusalem, and the Lord will be king over all. And we'll see exactly what he meant by that. How prophetic it was that 2,500 years ago, Zechariah nailed what's going to be happening during the Easter period that we're talking about now. And then John starts off his gospel with one of the greatest control miracles of all time. It's one of the most famous miracles. It's the water to wine at the wedding feast miracle. He got to it early because it teaches a good lesson. Now the family is there. Jesus' mother's there. Jesus is there. They're not wedding crashers. This is probably a friend or a relative that they're attending the wedding. And his mother finds something that's wrong. She points it out. She comes to Jesus and said, they're about to run out of wine. She's asking for a fix. Maybe she's even trying to show off the talents of this son of hers. But Jesus is having no part of that. He tells her very curtly, my time hasn't come. Why are you talking to me about that? But Jesus fixes it because he realized that the wedding is the important day for both the bride and the groom. It's important for the people there. This is a holy institution. He's not going to let it go sideways. Think of all the trouble people go through to make sure this was a perfect day. You've been to the weddings and planned the weddings and had your daughters, you know this. The daughters spend all this time getting the groom cleaned up and telling him where to stand and what to say, and it can't be ruined because of something that the caterer didn't take care of. So Jesus tells the servants to get those big crates, those big barrels of water. They held 20 gallons each. They were heavy. And he said, just fill them with water. Not everybody knew about this miracle. The wine steward didn't, because he goes to the bridegroom after he tastes it and says, what a great host you are. You've saved the best for the last. The bridegroom has to feel great about that. The embarrassment has stopped that could have happened because Jesus brought a gift to the wedding. He brought the gift of joy. And throughout his teachings, throughout his miracles, throughout everything that he does, it brings joy to us, and we'll see some more of that. So with compassion, he fixed it. There's joy. The wedding in Galilee is a success, and he's left an impression on us. Well, why is he even in Galilee? Back in Jerusalem, nobody thinks it's an important city. It's the provincial capital. There are seaports that are more important than anything in Galilee. Nazareth is a very small village. They even make fun of the accents later on of the Galileans. And as somebody who was born at Johnny's Creek, Alabama, and raised in Chickamauga, Georgia, I can tell you about the impact of what happens with your accent when people say, where are you from? I'm from that place where people talk like this. But Nathanael who's also known as Bartholomew in the other Gospels. In John's Gospel, Nathanael is the guy to be a disciple of Christ, who, when he hears that Jesus is there and he's the Messiah and they need to follow him, he said, what good could possibly come out of Galilee? Well, it was unimportant to the Pharisees. What was important to them was Jerusalem, because they could control the temple. They could control what went into the minds of the people. They also had the protection of Pilate. In the remarks that Dale made, you had an accurate reading of the accounts of what Pilate provided. He provided a way out for the Jewish officials. He provided a way out for Herod. He thought that they were helping him. And little does he know that they've dumped this thing back in his lap later on, and he just wanted to wash his hands out of it. But Jerusalem may not have been important to anybody but the Pharisees. Galilee was important to a lot of people. It starts with it's important to the Romans. It's a fertile area. It has great grain crops. They need this for their soldiers' bread. They need this to feed their animals. As we know from when Joshua went in to that area, it has magnificent grapes and figs and olive oils. It has a fresh lake with very delicate fish. It's an important area. And the Romans even loved their ham. And if you remember the story of the prodigal, he left there to go not far away past the Sea of Galilee to a place where there was a commercial pig operation. That was important to the Romans. Not important to the Pharisees. Galilee is important to the Romans. Why is Jesus there? Because it's important to God. If you couldn't pick a place anywhere else on earth that was more important for what God was looking for when he put Jesus there. To the north of Galilee, there was a major Roman road. It connected the seaports that were important to the trade routes. South of Galilee, the same thing, connected to the capital cities, to the other seaports, and back to the other trade routes. In this area, you had a constant movement of people who were diverse in their languages, diverse in their ethnicity and their race, and for where they were and where they were going back to, and how else could you spread the word any faster of the good news than to a place like that. And God's plan is being revealed in this place for this reason, because it's important for Jesus to come from this area where the word will spread quickly, because there's nothing else to distract them there. There are no theaters, there are no games, there's nothing else going there. The temple is far away, and most of the people can only get there once a year. But it's an important place for God. The other thing that's important about this area is the Sea of Galilee. We talked about the analogies that Zechariah drew to the living water and its importance. What John calls out the living water. And here's the Sea of Galilee. And there are four things that we want to take away from that. Excuse me. And it's the creation story is there, because Jesus is out on that water. And one of the first things that we know is he gains control. That's to demonstrate the creation. And we're all in the middle of this creation, and yet he's in control. While his disciples are struggling in the boat and are fearing everything, he's asleep. And he sees how disturbed they are, and he rebukes the water. He rebukes the waves. He tells the storm to call it. And it does. It calms down. Sea of Galilee, he controls. That's what God does. He created it. He can control it. We can't. And then you think about the other things that he can do in there. There's the catchers. He calls them fishers of men. They're there to catch something. Catching is better than trying to catch. The catches are there. That's something else that's important in the Sea of Galilee. And you know something else that's important there, and it was in the little song that Chris was talking about, those fish that they caught. One of them had a coin in its mouth. It had a coin in its mouth. What's that all about? It was not a way for Peter to avoid paying the temple tax. It's not tax evasion. What it simply was is the impact was that he is in control. Peter's worried about paying a tax. Somebody else is worried, not that the Messiah is here, but he's at the temple and he has to pay the treasury tax to the temple. And Jesus is saying, here's how important that is. You go out to the water that my God created. You catch that fish that he caused to be there. It'll have that coin in its mouth. And it doesn't matter whose image is on that coin. because Jesus is king. So he's here at the Lake of Galilee, the Sea of Galilee, Tiberias it's called, Gennesaret it's called. It's this fresh body of water where all these things happen, where he can demonstrate control over the creation. He can demonstrate the creation itself by causing it to do things, to provide things simply like a coin and a fish. And you can see the catchers. That's where he found his first disciples. Jesus has been doing this for a while. He has 3 years, 3 days, 3 hours, and now he's down to the last day. The last year is what he will go through, and he gets to that last day. And if you think about that, how important is that? A third of the Gospels, all the pages of all the Gospels, a third of them are about the trip that's coming up. He has 1 year before he gets there, and there's examples of his teaching that's in there. What's important, I think, for us to know is he taught the people who were known as the teachers, and one of those is the example of Nicodemus. It's also right there in John. Nicodemus, he told him, "You are Israel's teacher, but you don't understand." Why do you not understand? Because you don't listen. And when you don't listen, you don't accept. You don't accept what you're being told. So he taught Nicodemus that. Then he taught him something else. He calls out to Nicodemus and he told him, just as Moses lifted up the snake in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up. Is Jesus comparing himself to that bronze snake on top of a pole that's out in front? Let's think about that. The Israelites were faced with a plague of snakes. It's a curse. They had done wrong in the eyes of God. These poisonous snakes are going throughout their camp. People are dying. They're begging God now to stop it. And what does he do? He tells Moses, go cast a bronze snake, put it up on a pole. Have everybody in the camp, 2.5 million people, walk past it and look up at it. 2.5 million people walked past it, looked up. Nobody else got bitten. Those who'd been bitten got cured. What was the healing power of that snake up on a pole? Nada, nothing. It's just a bronze piece of work up on a pole. They got healed because they remembered. They obeyed God. They did what he said. All they had to do to be cured was to listen to him. With that thing up on the pole, that image up there, let's not let that get out of our mind. So what did we just learn from that? There's a learning about that goes to that. This is common sense. We're God's people. We're his creation. You want to get along with God? It's real easy. It's obey, which is okay. And you obey in the way, not in your way, not in my way, in his way. That's how you obey. And if you obey God, things will be okay. And there are other things that we're taught. Jesus used parables, and they were all about common sense too. Plants, seeds being put in the right soil. Well, that's common sense. But what was the deeper meaning? You'll get what effort you put into something. Don't waste your time. Don't waste God's time. So that snake had no healing spirit. People obeyed, they got healed. People obeyed the parables and the teachings, and it turned out all right. And now we come to another one of those water stories. It's not quite at the Sea of Galilee, but it's the woman at the well, and it's just full of rich information. She's a Samaritan woman, and the people that were there reviled the Samaritans because the Jews, when they were taken away in the Babylonian captivity, and these people, the Samaritans, were brought into their homes, into their villages, and took everything over. And that's what happened. And they hated the people for it. And when the Jews came back and found people in their own homes, in their own villages, tending their own crops in their own orchards, they were mistreated. Back the Samaritans back then. 750 years before this moment, the Jews still remembered it. They weren't loving their neighbors. This woman never did anything to anybody. She may have been the lowest person on the totem pole in her village because she was called out by Jesus as having been married 5 times and living with somebody that was not her husband. And we know how he felt about the marriage ceremony. But yet here he is, sharing water with a Samaritan woman. Jews didn't share anything with Samaritans because of something that happened 750 years earlier. So what's this about? There's a lesson for us. It's called social justice. He called out what's wrong. He did it many times. He called out for social justice for the poor. He called out social justice for those who were downtrodden. He made us all understand when he says, love thyself and love thy neighbor, love thy God. It's all a triangle. It's right there. It's together. It supports itself. Then there were parables about about the lost sheep and the good shepherd. Those are not antiquated agricultural things that have no bearing today. They're important things then. They're important now. And we'll come back to them, but keep in mind 2 things, Psalm 22 and Psalm 23. We'll get to those. Now then, let's fast forward it. Jesus is coming to Jerusalem. He's had his 3 years of his ministry, and it's really going to come down to a 7-day period, and inside of that 3 days, and inside of that 3 hours. And he's doing the triumphal entry. And the crowds are there. They're on all sides of the roads. They're on the rooftops. They're even up in the trees. The Messiah has come. There may have been 2 million people in Jerusalem for the holiday, for the feast. And here they are lining the roads because they want to see this Jesus. It's almost like he had to walk through a valley of people. The Messiah is here. He's walking through these people. He's ridden in on this animal. They're even throwing their robes down so that it doesn't stir up any dust. That's how much they were excited to see the Messiah. And if you think about he's walking through this, he's entering Jerusalem through this crowd of people. And he knows in a few days, 3 days, they're going to turn against him. He knows that. But now he's exalted. He walks through what I think of as a valley of people. And in the 23rd Psalm, he talked to us about walking through the valley of the shadow of death. We walk through the valleys all the times of our lives. A valley is not walking into a cave that's dark and where there's no exit. Oh, it might be not the sunniest place in the world because the sun doesn't get down and shine down on the valley but for a few hours at a time. But it says the valley. That means we can walk through it. And how do we walk through it? Because we go through the shadow of death. We don't go through death. There's a difference. What Jesus is preparing for is he's going to be going through the shadow of death. If you look at Revelation, there is a description of the second death. That's for those who didn't obey. That's for those who never came around. And it's the death. It's over. The soul is gone. The spirit is returned to God, and the body is demolished. That's not what's happening here. Whenever somebody is baptized, you've crossed the shadow of death. You left behind, you died to sin, but you still have your body. And when we depart this earth, that's not our death. That's the shadow of death. Now Jesus is going through this. It can be scary sometimes. Our darkest days might be right now, and we think we're stuck in this valley. We're going to get out of it. We're going to get out of that. They love Jesus now, and it's just Sunday. Well, on Monday, he clears the temple, and now then the temple officials see a threat. They've heard about it. They knew he was coming, but now he's on their turf, they think. He clears the temple. It's just 3 days to Friday, and he knows what's going to happen. And even while he rests on Wednesday, the plotting and the treachery are getting more involved and deeper. And on Thursday, he has his Last Supper with his disciples. That's it. It's the last one. Then he has his crucifixion on Friday. That's the shadow of death is now just hours away. His day starts off at 6 o'clock in the morning. The sun is barely up, and he's in front of Pilate. Pilate tries to wash his hands and send him to Herod. Herod has nothing to do with it, sends him back to Pilate. He's crucified, and it's barely noon on Friday. He has 3 hours to go. In 3 years, he prepared for this. He prepared us for this. It has to be done. It's noon. That's the 6th hour of the day, and a miracle of control happens. It turns dark, and you can't forget about the valley and the shadow of death and its darkness. It's dark for everybody now. They all should know what has just happened. And they were sitting there cheering. The same people who said, "Oh, the Messiah is here. Hosanna, Hosanna," were saying, "Kill him. Kill him." He's not dead yet. He's on the cross. He's been lifted up just like the bronze snake for all to see, all those who are responsible to see. And then, with a little time left, he's into his last 3 hours. He starts reciting the 22nd Psalm. "Why have thou forsaken me?" That's the first line. They think he's calling out to Eli, "Eli, come to son." No, he's talking to God. "Why have thou forsaken me?" But you know who knew what the rest of that psalm said? A lot of people, but especially the Pharisees. They knew what the rest of it was. And there's a line that goes in there that Jesus doesn't, it's not recorded that he said from the cross, but it says, "I am poured out like water." You can't get away from it. The living water. And that's what's coming out of Jerusalem. That's what was being forecast and foretold. And you know what it must feel like when he gets to the next hour of his life? There he is. And he cries out for water. He simply says, "I'm thirsty." And what did he get? As Dale was telling us and reading from that, he got a concoction of vinegar. The living water is on the cross, and he just says, "I'm thirsty," and he asked for just water, and he didn't get it. There's 1 hour to go. 9 hours after all this mess started. He's not done. He has just a little bit more to say. He said, "It's finished." And that's what happened after 3 years, 3 days, and 3 hours. It's finished. And then he just said to God, "Into your hands I commit my soul." 3 years, 3 days, 3 hours, and the victory is his. He's dead. He's dead to life on this earth. And we know in another 3 days when he arises from that grave, that's the ultimate victory over the death. That's not anything but emerging from the valley of the shadow of death. He overcame that, and that's his example for us. And what does that do for us? It opens the door for us. And today is a nice day if you're thinking about baptism. It's a really great day for that. You have all to gain. It just takes a step. It's an important step because it's your first step out of that shadow of death. That's what it's about. Our elders are here. There are people here who can study with you. Remember the first miracle we talked about? It brought joy. That's what baptism is. That's a different kind of joy, but that's what it is. It's yours today. And just like he was looking over us in the 23rd Psalm in the valley of the shadow of death, "For thou art with me," he is with us today. And once you do this, he will be with you forever. And you know what? How this ends? The water is here. And the water is here. Won't you come while we sing?